Jazz, the Mammoth, and the Utes, Cougars, and Aggies. When it comes to sports in Utah, we've got you covered. This is Scotty G and the coach, Tim LaCoe, presented by Mountain Land Supply on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Scotty G and the coach. Joining us now from Big 12 Radio, one of our favorites, Ari Temkin, kind enough to join us right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Ari, how you doing?
I'm great, Scotty. How are you?
I'm doing well. We got a lot of Big 12 stuff to talk about. First off, let's get to the situation at Texas Tech. Obviously, Brendan Sorsby, tremendous player, really unfortunate situation. We wish the best for him. But overall, how does that impact assuming he may not go next year or a good chunk of the season next year, how does that impact your belief on the quality of that Texas Tech program?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe based on, the letter of the law and the precedent that's been set that Brendan Sorsby will be quarterback for Texas Tech next year. And, so, I mean, much of their plan around next season and being the favorites of the Big 12 depended upon, Sorsby being the starting quarterback. I was arguing that even with Sorsby, BYU should be in the conversation with what they bring back. I mean, Tech has a ton of talent, but BYU brings back significantly more players. So even with Sorsby, I thought that BYU should be in the conversation for favorites of the Big 12 this season. And, I think without Sorsby, BYU is firmly in that favorite discussion. I think Houston, too, based again on what they bring back. Arizona's another team that should factor into the top of the conference. I don't think Utah will be that deep either in terms of down the line. So, we sort of did a post-spring power ranking today, and I think I had them third behind BYU and Houston, but I think you could make the case that both Arizona and Utah should also be in that conversation too. I mean, it looks like Will Hammond, who tore his ACL last year, is going to be the starting quarterback for them. It just depends on how quickly he's able to get back, and then up to speed. But yeah, it's to me, I'm operating under the assumption that Sorsby will not be playing quarterback for Texas Tech and will not be playing in college football again.
Yeah, he might be USFL or whatever, the Renegades or the Gamblers.
That's it's a tough one to see exactly what the future might hold. But honestly, Ari, when you look at the landscape, I mean, this seems like an epidemic that's not really going away anytime soon.
Yeah, weird. You put on these devices, the ease for which people can sign up. I would argue that there's some pretty predatory practices as well that are being employed on these apps through the casinos, and targeting specific bettors, in targeting specific plays. Once you've lost and fully cashed out, pushing notifications that get this bonus when you make another deposit. I mean, it's some pretty predatory stuff in my opinion. And then obviously the way in which, casinos, sports betting is so intertwined in sports content. I mean, the irony is not lost on anybody that many of the platforms that are reporting on this story are also exclusively sponsored by the same casinos. And, look, there's plenty of conversation around the it's just business aspect of it, but I think it goes far deeper than the it's just business. I mean, we're, Big 12 Radio is sponsored by Modelo, a beer company, right? But we're not doing content specific to this, drinking in the same way that, again, gambling and casinos are completely tied into what we're talking about. I mean, talking about over-under win totals for the season, talking about game lines. You have exclusive sportsbook sponsorships where anytime you bring up a line, it's being brought to you by a sportsbook. There's an irony here of, this entire deal is set up to really leverage the sports watching 18 to 30-year-old and probably, quite frankly, 18 to 50-year-old that's in states where it's legal sports gambling. And yet here's a large subsect of that 18 to 30-year-old that is completely shut out from that world. That's the part to me I'm not trying to make excuses for Brendan Sorsby. I mean, he knew the rules and he broke the rules. But at the same time, it's crazy how deeply in bed the networks are that put these games on, and the gambling companies, the casinos, in charge of this. And, again, like 67%, the stat in 2023 that came out was 67% of college students, had placed a wager. 67%. That's just an insane number.
Wow.
And again, when you think about just how deep that is, if you're Brendan Sorsby, you're at your apartment, you've got a roommate who's a regular student, and he's placing bets on his phone, but you can't.
Yeah, it is crazy, and the irony, we talked about that yesterday. The irony is lost on nobody. I don't, but the bottom line is it's a huge infusion of cash, and cash seems to be king usually. I'm going to flip the script a little bit. Talk about just the season that just ended, the college basketball season. Big 12 really, obviously, with Arizona kind of leading the charge, but represented themselves very well this season, and have some very, very high prospects, including the nation's number one prospect just committed yesterday to Kansas. How do you see the basketball shaping out next year as teams kind of finish up their rosters?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, look, I expect that the top of the Big 12 will sort of remain at the top of the Big 12. And apologies to Scotty for his Utah State team that just lost their head coach to Cincinnati, who I think is one of the better hires, in the Big 12.
No question. That guy can coach ball.
Hey, you know what? That's what we call March in Logan, is replacing a head coach. So it's kind of rinse and repeat. But I will say, like, being around all these coaches, like next year will be my 10th year doing play-by-play, and it'll be my 6th head basketball coach. Wow. I've seen a lot of them, and a lot of them have a lot of great qualities, obviously, as why they're successful. Jared Calhoun is easily the most, from an X's and O's standpoint, is a savant, and he'll have Cincinnati cooking real quick. I love that guy.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably even worse now today, Scotty, than it used to be in terms of losing coaches and players. It's just the nature of the beast, and it's funny because every level has it. I mean, the Big 12 isn't immune to that either, because the SEC and the Big 10 have even more money than the Big 12 has. So there's levels to it, but and of course, his Cincinnati background, working for Huggins, I think it makes tons of sense. I think, again, I think that's by far the best hire of the Big 12. But yeah, I mean, the top 5 in the Big 12 this past year, I expect those to remain the top 5. I think Arizona, they reloaded. They're going to get Krivas and Karchenkov back, 2 of the instrumental pieces that helped lead them to a Final Four. They added, 5-star and Caleb Holt, who played at Prolific Prep, who is probably better than either Koa Pete or Braden Burries. They're 2 one-and-done guys from this past year. And Pete actually may return to Arizona. I mean, he's a guy right now that's barely a top 20 pick. And again, based on the kind of cash infusion available from college versus what a 20 through 30 pick might get in the NBA draft. And then not only that, but the opportunity to have the ball in your hands and be playing as opposed to sitting on a bench, maybe going up back and forth between the G League and the NBA. I feel like there's a lot of opportunities for guys to stay, and Koa Pete could certainly be one of them. I expect that Pete will be back kind of given where he is. So Arizona should 100% be the favorites in the Big 12 next year. Iowa State has reloaded. Iowa State's coach, TJ Otzelberger, has such a great idea of who he is and what the program is. He's not shooting for the stars. He shoots for certain expectations, certain characteristics he's looking for. They filled out their roster really quickly in through the portal almost immediately, which gives you a pretty good sense of, again, he knows what he needs, he knows what he wants, and types of player. My alma mater, Kansas, had a big day yesterday with Tyron Stokes, who is a lot different as a number 1 overall recruit than Darren Peterson. For one, he's got an edge to him, and I think he's got a lot to prove, whereas it felt like Darren Peterson was playing like he had nothing to prove, and yet despite that, probably did, because he's not going to be the number 1 overall pick anymore, it appears. But to me, Stokes, like, I've heard NBA scouts say that he wouldn't even be a top 5 pick in this draft. So again, like, I think he's got a lot to prove. I'm excited to see about that. Also, his former AAU teammate, who's also a 5-star, Taylon Kinney, is coming to Kansas. They added a freshman from Toledo, Leroy Blyden, who can run the point, shot 40% from 3 last year. So, like, I think they've done a really good job with the roster. I think it's entirely better than it was last year, and I expect Kansas to at least get out of the first weekend of the NCAA tournament next year. We'll see how the rest of the roster goes. Texas Tech's going to reload. It's funny because most of these teams like that we're used to seeing some consistency and continuity year over year, Arizona, Iowa State, Houston, they're all rebuilding. Houston especially too. We haven't really seen them reload and rebuild through the portal like they are right now, but they've got some big time players coming in as well. So I also expect this to be a big year for BYU. Bruce Branch is coming in. The Big 12 has 4 of the top 8 overall recruits in the Big 12 coming in. So as good as the freshmen were this past year, it looks to be even better this upcoming year. I think BYU is going to take a huge step with Branch. I've kind of been wondering how much they'll put into the physicality part of it, into defense. That's been kind of their big issue. And I think they, while they don't need to be elite on defense, if they're going to be elite on offense, they probably need to be at least good on defense. And they haven't even been passable on defense. I think the Big 12 should be as good as it always is next year. And, I certainly expect, again, like Cincinnati was a fringe tournament team. I expect them to be a tournament team this year. West Virginia was a fringe tournament team. They actually won the college basketball crown. So I expect them to be another team competing for a tournament berth. So, getting to a Final Four was great. The Big 12, though, it's been a little bit of time now since they've had a breakthrough and not only getting, to win a national championship, but last year getting to the national championship game and losing. And then, of course, this year getting the Final Four, getting boat raced. The Big 12 has much higher expectations for itself and, wants to get multiple teams to the Final Four and win a national championship again for the first time since 2022.
I just want to clarify one thing you said. Arizona and Kansas don't rebuild, and Houston don't rebuild, they redecorate. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
I mean, when vendors come to your door and, hey, we'd love to be in your house. Yeah. But that was just the small one. And of course a joke, but
you're right. These are mansions they've got. They're not rebuilding
right. They're
mansion.
redecorating. You don't need to do anything structurally. But the other thing I was going to say is everyone else is playing checkers and Tommy Lloyd is playing chess. I've seen that. I mean, I coached against Tommy for way too many years in the WCC, and that dude, he knows not only how to coach a team, but he knows how to handle public relations, and he in a perfect way because he's just authentic, and then he knows how to run a program and fund a program.
Ari, you brought up Darren Peterson, and it was really interesting. When I was calling the NCAA tournament for Utah State, and I stuck around and watched the Kansas game that he was in, and so I wanted to see him up close in person. And granted, I only watched him for 2 games, but I sat courtside, and I just zeroed in on him the whole time. And obviously the talent was phenomenal. You can see that. It just, it's easy to spot. But you could tell he was a little hampered. He was probably 75, 80%. And this may not be fair on my part, but the body language just didn't look good. And I don't know if that's because the injuries. I don't know if it was just that he was biding his time so he could get to the draft. I don't know what it was, but it wouldn't be something that would keep me from drafting him, but it's something that I would certainly want to consider when I'm deciding to dump, hundreds of millions of dollars into a kid.
Yeah, well, and not only that, but this is a loaded draft.
Yes.
And, you can't miss in that spot. I mean, the number 1 pick spot is a really tough spot because you can't miss because everybody's going to look at you and, history will judge you based on how those players turn out. And, look, before the season, midway through the season, probably 3/4 of the way through the season, I said, you'd be crazy to pass up on Darren Peterson. And now I think it's a legitimate discussion. I think if I'm an NBA team and I'm going to the combine, I mean, I've got some really pointed questions I want to ask. I'm looking at film. I mean, this was a disaster of a year for him. When you think, had he not even played this year, and he just said, I'm not going to play, I'm going to take the year off, I'm going to get ready for the draft, he'd be the number 1 pick. And so the fact that he played actually hurt his draft status. Now, he only finished a handful of games, so he missed 11 games. Then there was another additional games that he couldn't make it through the entire way. It felt in real time like he was just sort of pacing himself, like he was just kind of taking himself out and didn't want to overexert himself. And, all of the reporting went towards the cramps that he basically had. And somebody that I trust on this reported that, he basically had a really bad cramping episode with his full body cramped up, basically during the portion of camp that Bill Self hosts that's called, the Hell Week, where, he's trying to get these guys in shape so that, they can play deep into March and have the stamina and ability to be there at the end of the year, at the end of the marathon, right? Like every coach does some kind of Hell Week, I'd imagine. And, it's not easy, but it's just about getting in the right shape so that you can play to the fullest capabilities at the end of the marathon, period. Makes sense. And so apparently from that episode, he had these full body cramps. And so he then had this psychological breakdown of like a fear that it was going to happen again. So anytime he would feel those symptoms coming on, he would basically check himself out because of his fear of having that happen again. Hello? These are all huge red flags here. What? Like, first of all, he couldn't make it through Hell Week. He couldn't, what kind of shape was he in? Like, he's never ran like that. I can't imagine Bill Self has coached anybody that was unable to make it through. And then that player went on to play on the, for the team that year. Also then, I understand that there's probably going to be some issues psychologically from having that, but man, if I'm an NBA team, I'm looking deep into that stuff. The guy was phenomenal when he played. And I will say this, for some of the players that carried Kansas through the majority of the season, Melvin Council, Bryson Tiller, Trey White, those guys completely disappeared in the final 4 games of the season. I'm talking about the Big 12 tournament and the NCAA tournament. And Peterson played to a pretty high level, to give him credit. He was the guy that showed up in the biggest games for Kansas down the stretch. There was just so much window dressing over the course of the season and so much that was being said that it just felt like, minds were already made up about the situation. But, Kansas didn't make it out of the first weekend, having nothing to do with Darren Peterson's play. It was the opposite. It was the guys that carried them through the course of the season, Trey White, Bryson Tiller, and Melvin Council. And it's sort of ironic because, in a sense, those guys emerged in a way that made it seem like, they're going to be better. They're going to have the depth that we didn't think they were going to have. And it was sort of a full circle thing where the year ends with those guys having had really good years, completely shooting well below their percentages over the course of the season. Their averages, everything was down by a substantial margin. And that's what undid Kansas. So it's a long way to say, man, I don't know how much I trust Darren Peterson, but he did show up in the biggest moments. With that being said, if I have the first pick, you'd be hard to get me off of AJ DeBonsa right now.
Yeah. Hey, Ari, I know we got to let you go, but real quick, as football season's about to begin, obviously the most pressure in the Big 12 is going to be on Morgan Scalley. I mean, when you replace the guy like Kyle Whittingham, there's a lot of pressure on you. But not too far behind, in my opinion, is Kelly Papinga, who's got to take over for Jay Hill running that defense, which has been spectacular at BYU. Jay Hill's going to Michigan. And so Kelly Papinga takes over that defense, which frankly has been the strength of the Cougars over the last couple of years. Just how do you see that playing out for BYU as they make that transition away from Jay Hill?
Yeah, it's a great point because, I'm sure BYU fans, like the friendly fire, the Kyle Whittingham piece didn't just impact Utah. Suddenly it impacts BYU. And I mean, I think you're right. Remember, they brought in Jay Hill. Their defense was atrocious. And then year 1 of Jay Hill wasn't great, but year 2 was phenomenal. And so, the players he brought with him from Weber State, I mean, one of them just got drafted as a pass rusher. I mean, they've had a bunch of guys that Hill brought over from Weber State that were very successful. Coming back from a personnel standpoint, they've got, I would argue, the best linebacking core in the Big 12, maybe in the country. They've got a great defensive line. I think there's certainly some question marks within their secondary, but I mean, I think I read it was 77% of their total defensive production is back. So I think you're totally right on, Kelly Papinga dealing with some pressure because of how good their defense has been. And look, their defense carried them last year but they were led by a true freshman quarterback who, got on campus right before the season started. And so, now that you have a full off season with Bear Bachmeier, that was there for spring camp, that, he's way more familiar with what's going on. I don't know that the defense needs to be as dominant as it's been because the offense should be significantly better. But I mean, there's some numbers year over year that tend to not occur, like their turnover numbers and their close game numbers. Last 2 years, last year indicated that their defense should take a huge step back, and it didn't. They still had the same amount of turnovers. They still won a ton of close games. So again, it's like, all right, does that continue, or is this one of those years where that stuff tends to even out? As for Utah, I bet Utah fans will be watching Utah games as much as they're going to be watching, or Michigan games as much as they're going to be watching Utah games, because it's not necessarily about how good Scally is, but it's about how bad Cal Whittingham is.
I was, it's funny. I was watching some games with a former offensive coordinator who'd been with a bunch of different teams, and some he'd left on his own, some he had been asked to leave. And he said, I go, why are you watching these guys? He goes, I'm hate watching. He goes, I have a lot of teams that I hate watch, that I watch because I hate them and I want nothing bad to happen, but I still am going to watch because I want to see what happens to them.
I mean, it's why the Dallas Cowboys are so highly rated every week, because everybody wants to tune in to watch them lose. As many people want to watch them win, everybody wants to watch them lose. That's why they have been America's team. They haven't won anything since the 90s, but that was part of the America's team allure, was that you either loved them or hated them, but you had to tune in to see them.
Either way, you're going to watch. Ari, we appreciate it, man.
Yep.
Thanks for the chat, and we'll talk soon.
Appreciate you guys. Take care. Thanks for having me on.
Ari Temkin, Big 12 Radio right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.